Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading and probably only all things Charles Band related podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and what can I say? I love the Barbarian. And I'm located in Brooklyn, New York. But, you know, I have a saying, and I say this often, that as long as there are Steve Guntleys across the screen from me, there will always be contenders. Is there a Steve Guntley across the screen from me today?
Well, there sure is. I'm Steve Guntley, and I'm so dumb I'd use a Norvac for a tutor. Yeah, that's right. I went there. My comedy is edgy. I think that's what people really respond to. This is the podcast about holographic dancers, four-armed diner owners, and interspecies gladiatorial battles. That's because this is a podcast all about Arena, a gloriously silly sci-fi opus from the latter days of the Empire reign. Oh my God, what a fun, ridiculous movie. I had such a good time with this one. And we have a very special guest joining us today to help us cover this massive sci-fi epic. Who's joining us today, Jared?
So this is a wonderful guest for this episode because Arena, among some other movies, can be found in the Arrow video video. What is it? Empire of Screams. That's what it is. Empire of Screams. Enter the video store box set. I have it in front of me and I can't even tell you the name of it. That's that's so much for being prepared. Anyway, this movie can be found in this box set, and I thought it would be a good idea to bring a frequent guest from the Arrow Video podcast, producer and VHS distributor under the hilarious name Black VVideo. I'm talking, of course, about Shea Mossefin. Shea, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing so good. I'm so happy to be here. I so dig your show, and
thanks.
I love it, and I love Charles Band and pretty much everything that he's touched. So very excited to talk about this with you, and we'll have a lot to discuss with Arena. That's for sure.
We're so excited to have you, and I just want to give you some extra props because for listeners who can't tell, Shea went to the trouble to quickly download some audio recording technology like real quickly, like on the phone with us. So we appreciate you going to the extra effort.
No, Steve, no, Steve, you have to save this kind of behind the scenes stuff from our upcoming Patreon feed.
Oh, excuse me. So sorry. Yes. But we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate you going to that extra effort.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it. I needed Audacity anyway. So, hey,
there you go.
Making my life easier too.
The Audacity. Shea, we're so excited to have you. When did you first kind of get invested or excited about these kind of wacky B movies that we're talking about on this show?
Oh my God, when did I not? I grew up watching videotapes, spooky TV. My mom used to watch that. What was it? It was on, oh my God, I think it was called Mystery Theater. I can't remember. It was on the public broadcasting station, and there was a gory animation at the beginning, and it was usually murder mysteries and stuff. And I remember hiding behind the couch and getting so excited to hide behind the couch. Every time that intro came on, it wasn't until my adult years that I realized, oh, that's Edward Gorey. That's
nice.
Like, yeah, I had no idea as a kid. And I was also a bit of a latchkey kid. I was born in 1980. So I pretty much raised myself, and my sister did a great job of keeping me generally alive. After school, I would go across the street to hang out with the teenage boys, and they always had everything horror from the video store. And I watched so many horror movies as like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old.
Same.
Yes. My parents had no idea. I had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger when I was super young, and my mom was perplexed. Like, how do you know about this guy? I'm like, well, because I watched it. Like,
duh, Mom. How do you think I know about it?
You can't escape it. So fast forward, I moved into the valley near the Chugach mountain range in Alaska. I spent the 90s there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there was a mom and pop video store in Eagle River, Alaska. that had a horror section. And I had this one friend, and we didn't really have a lot in common. Like our moms were friends. They worked at the same medical office. So we were friends by default.
Oh yeah.
One thing we had in common is we both loved horror movies. And so we were always trying to scare each other. And I remember taking all of my allowance and buying out the horror video section at One Stop Video when Blockbuster drove them out of business. I think it was 1993, 1992. And yeah, by then I'd probably watched about a dozen Charles Band related titles and didn't really put pieces together because we didn't have internet. I didn't really put two and two together, but they all had this very pulpy kind of comic book feel, but they also looked very big budget. But they felt big budget because they had actors that I'd seen in bigger movies in starring roles. Like I remember, was it Dr. Mordred had Brian Thompson in it? And I was like, that's the guy from Cobra.
Yeah.
I can only think of Brian Thompson from Cobra.
Yes.
Like putting
I met Brian
the
Thompson.
swords together. Really?
Yeah, he gave a speech to my theater group back in high school. Like I don't know why, we were at some like theater convention in Denver and he was the keynote speaker and he was great. He's huge. He's got a crazy like he was showing us how well he could project in a big theater. He was cool.
His voice is so deep. So
Yeah.
is he like a big guy then? Like
He's a big guy. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I was in high school. I was smaller then, so maybe he just felt really big, but he was a big guy. He was an imposing dude.
Big presence either way. Yeah.
But very nice. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So I think also something that a lot of the Charles Band movies had that I loved was the lights and fog concept.
Oh yeah.
Tell that they're in a single environment and they're giving it as much depth as they can. And lights and fog always make things look really cool.
It's true.
But also the investment in really creative effects. I loved the claymation. I loved the practical latex blobby monsters that he'd make. I loved the blue lightning. I loved the way that everything congealed together. And yeah, just as I got older, I realized, wow, Charles Band produced so many things that I love, directed things that I loved. His dad directed things that I loved.
Yeah.
Bury the Living is one of my favorite black and white horror films.
Mm.
Had potential to be Night of the Living Dead before Night of the Living Dead. Like they made a change in the script last minute, but there was supposed to be a horde of the Walking Dead at the end. And
really?
Yeah. So I've been a little bit obsessed with that family and just the fact that Richard makes music for their movies. Like they're just such a prolific horror family. So yeah, I've always loved B movies, horror movies. I'm a tape collector. I got into collecting obviously as a kid, but I hung on to them for quite a few years. And then I'd start selling them off in lots on eBay. Like when I discovered eBay, I'd sell off a huge box of 50 tapes or so, and then I'd buy another.
Oh yeah.
Because it's so cheap. Or I'd go to Goodwill and just stack up and get as many tapes as I could. And nowadays those tapes are worth so much money. I should have held on to them, but I didn't care at the time. I just wanted to watch them and talk about them with my friends. My friend Peter and I, he's a local business owner, owns a vintage shop called Hollywood Babylon. And I'm actually releasing one of his films that he made when he was 15.
Oh, wow.
Coming up in a few months here. It's called The Boys Night Out. It's a slasher, kind of a mutant slasher movie, part Revenge of the Nerds, part Toxic Avenger.
Oh, great.
Yeah. We call them like bad movie nights, but they're kind of rad movie nights. And the funnest night we ever had was showing The Eliminators. Like that.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe my top favorite B movie. I fucking love it. And I also have a memory of watching what I now know is Oblivion the night of my prom. Actually went to prom in the 10th grade with a friend who didn't have a date. Her date like bailed on her last minute. She's like, well, let's just go together as friends. And I went to her house that night. I think her brothers had the tape and they put it on. We watched it like all night. And I love that movie too. I didn't realize that was a full moon release until I was much older. So
what's funny is that movie and this movie share some kind of full moon DNA and spirit.
They really do.
I was thinking a lot about Oblivion because I feel like what you're talking about too, the lights and smoke and stuff, like to elevate the single set in this, I think there's a creative way to do it and to give the illusion of having a bigger budget when you have kind of an interesting idea and you want to elevate it a little bit. And I think they do that so well in this movie. And I feel like when you don't do that well, you end up with, something like David Winter's Space Mutiny, which is sort of like probably not far off from, well, actually probably significantly less in budget, but it looks less in budget. Like this movie was very ambitious for Empire, and it was, this was touted at the time that they were going to be upwards of 10 million for this budget. It did not end up being that. But I mean, this thing, like, you can tell that there's care put into the details, and they want to hide the fact that these are isolated locations really well. And I think for the most part, they do a really nice job with it in this movie. I think you look at just the arena itself as a structure, and to get, there's definitely recycled footage in there, but there's a good amount of extras, and the scope of it, I think it really is the biggest. And I want to take a second when you were talking about some of the latex of the puppets and creature designs, and we talk about John Carl Buechler a lot on the show and how amazing he was. But there's 3 words that we have not mentioned yet on this show.
Oh, I think I know where you're going.
And those 3 words are Screaming Mad George.
Yeah, there we go. I think we synced that up perfectly.
Oh my God.
We got to talk about Screaming Mad George. Come on. He's amazing. He's amazing. And he gets to, like, this one really, we had kind of a lot of like really prestigious special effects artists working on this movie, like Mike Deak, who you mentioned previously, John Carl Buechler, Steve Wang. But yeah, Screaming Mad George is the guy. If you don't think you know his work, he's the guy behind Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Big Trouble in Little China, Predator, Freaked, and of course Society, where he probably should have earned his name based just solely on that movie. Like, because
solely on the front
insane,
bottoms.
You have to be insane to come up with the designs in that movie. But yeah, unbelievable artist and special effects wizard, really, who comes up with some deeply disturbed stuff in the best possible way.
He really does. He also did the effects on Children of the Corn. Is it Urban Harvest?
The Charlize Theron one. Yeah,
and he does a lot of, I've noticed, insect like cockroach effects that are so they're so good.
Oh God, the cockroach transformation in Nightmare 4 is one of maybe my favorite kill in the entire series. Like, that's not my favorite movie in the series, but that's definitely my favorite kill.
It's so good.
Yeah, and he has roots in punk rock too. He's just a total, like, he's a legend, and he's a maverick. And the combined force of Screaming Mad George and John Carl Buechler on Arena is insane. The creatures are also amazing. They all have their own distinct look. I noticed there's some real cyborg looking ones, silver faced. There's really blobby, hairless, like naked mole rat.
Yeah.
The creatures, and then you've got these insect-like creatures and half cyborg, half mutant guys. Like, everybody looks like they're from a different planet, a lot like Deep Space Nine.
Yes. Shout out to Quark. Yeah.
When the opening credits happen and you see the arena floating in space, I mean, how can you not think of Deep Space Nine? And then you learn
absolutely
much more about the connections to Deep Space Nine and Arena.
Well, I want to get into this more fully. First of all, I just want to throw out some facts and details about the movie Arena, and then we can kind of segue into our discussion from there.
By all means, Steve, fire them off.
Arena was released on September 18th, 1991. It was directed by Peter Manoogian and written by Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson, and it stars Paul Satterfield, Hamilton Camp, Claudia Christian, Marco Lamo, Sherry Shattuck, and Armin Shimmerman. Gotta love him. This is our second Peter Manoogian film after Demonic Toys, and this is his 4th Empire film in total, including Enemy Territory and the previously mentioned The Eliminators. And of course, he had a segment in Dungeon Master, as it seems every single person who's ever worked with Charles Band did. Yes. Everybody has a little piece of Dungeon Master. So we did fail to mention last time, though, that Peter Manoogian is actually filmmaking royalty to a degree. He's the son of Haig Manoogian, who was the founder of the film program at NYU. He was an early mentor and the first producer for Martin Scorsese. So very important guy. This film was written by Paul DeMeo and Danny Bilson, who previously wrote Trancers for Empire. Their follow-up film after this would be Disney's The Rocketeer, a movie I deeply love. I mean, I think these two were really kind of the Empire's secret weapons, and it sounds like, based on some of the footage on the DVD, that they're not entirely happy about the way that they were treated at that company and by this movie in particular, which we will get to. This movie was greenlit at the height of Empire's powers. So, you know, it's that post-Goonies boom where, like, they just bought Dino De Laurentiis' studio and, like, Empire's cranking these things out and they're really starting to make some real money. So Charles Band had the idea to basically, like, all right, we're already making movies that are like $2 million that are competing with movies that cost like $20 million. Why don't we bump up our volume just a little bit? We'll go to $5-10 million range and see what we can come up with our limited resources and our kind of scrappy know-how. And we'll see if we can really take on some of the big boys. And this was going to be one of those attempts. Originally, yeah, like you said, Jared, it was intended to be a $10 million budget. That then dropped to 5, which then dropped to 2, which then dropped to 1. I'm not sure what the exact final figure was. I know Danny Bilson in the DVD features said around 500,000. I don't think it would be that low. I feel like there's enough production value going on here that I would say it's probably at least 2 or 3.
Conflicting things. I read it's somewhere between 1 and 2, closer to 2. So I'm not really sure who to believe on this, but I will say that whether it was 500,000, whether it was 1 million, whether it was 2, what I appreciate so much about this movie is I feel like this is one of those times where you can see every cent of this budget on the screen.
Absolutely.
Like you can tell where they were pumping all of this money, because it's like the creature designs are amazing. And I like the fact that they didn't just say, all right, well, the humans or the not humans, rather, the spectators who are watching it can't just be humans. So we need to dress them up a little bit. So they don't go so far as to give them full on creature design. They kind of just have a bunch of people who are dressed like Klaus Nomi, which
a little bit
appreciate.
Yeah.
So right, the theatrical makeup and everything is silver or gold or translucent in some way.
And I think that's a good way to put it, that like this doesn't look like a big budget movie, but it does look like a very well utilized budget movie. Like, it doesn't look expensive, but it's clear that they used every dollar they could to kind of really fill out this world and make it seem a little realer, because you do have a very silly premise that you're kind of wrestling around at the very beginning. This would prove to be the last film shot at the Empire Studios in Rome. As you know, Charles Band, as we've covered, was forced to sell his facility. The film was completed in 1988, but there were a lot of complicated legal issues surrounding the studio's closing. So this actually didn't get a release in the States until 1991. And when that happened, it was direct to video, even though this was intended for a theatrical release. Yeah, so a little bit more about Danny Bilson. He said they have a nice long interview with him on the DVD where he's very candid about his feelings on this movie. He said that he and Paul DeMeo based their script on a 1947 John Garfield movie called Body and Soul, which is kind of one of the prototypical boxing movies. When we think of a boxing movie, we usually thinking of Body and Soul to some degree. There were, of course, a few nods to Rocky as well, because you can't really get around it. So Bilson claims that this is the favorite script that he's ever written during his time at Empire. He said he really loved the final product, but he said the final film barely resembles what he wrote. He said it was the script that they wrote, they said, was much more intentionally comedic and more of a parody of boxing movies than like meant to be an actual boxing movie. And that was their way of kind of working around the big rubber heads of it all. You know, like they're like, all right, these things are always going to look a little silly. Let's make this funny intentionally, and then we'll go with it. You still get glimmers of that in the final film, I think, but it feels like there was a bit of a clash behind the scenes between the writers wanting to take this a little more comedically and Band wanting to sort of play this at face value.
Isn't it crazy, Steve, how much this movie in so many ways resembles Robot Jocks?
It really is.
Like,
Yeah, they were
we-
using some of the same sets. Yeah.
and we're just having the same conversation about like Stuart Gordon and band not necessarily seeing eye to eye on, or was it Stuart Gordon and band, or was it the writer?
Oh, I think it was the writer. It was the writer on
Yeah,
that one.
but they did the same thing where they couldn't really agree on tone, and one person wanted to make a serious epic and someone else wanted to make something more akin to a parody, and then what we got was sort of in the middle, which is fine by me because I love Robot Jocks and
Yeah.
I will watch Robot Jocks many times. I really dig the finished product that they got there, and I think because of that, I mean, maybe it was them meeting somewhere in the middle makes this a nice companion piece to Robot Jocks for
It
me.
really
Like, this is a nice double feature.
It definitely makes sense that they're both in the same box set. And I think that like this late era of Empire, like pre Full Moon, really is kind of defined by that sort of like trying to fight for legitimacy, you know, like it feels like Band is really trying to play on the same level of some of the major studios. And so he doesn't want to be making like kind of B movie goofy stuff. He wants to be making like real blockbusters, but with a B movie budget. And I think maybe his ambition kind of outstripped what you can actually achieve with the budgets that he was able to gather from people. But yeah, it feels like Bilson was a little put out by this experience and said he hasn't revisited the movie and like this functionally ended his relationship with Empire and with Charles Band, even though he was quick to say that he really likes Charles Band as a person. He just struggles with his business practices.
It's so funny. That is such a common piece of feedback that people,
Yeah.
a lovely guy. I kind of got screwed, but he was
That's a gift. Like if you're gonna be like making movies like this and like obtaining financing in the haphazard way that Charlie Band does, you better be charming as hell. And it seems like he really is, and he seems like he genuinely likes people and likes working with people. So it's something at least.
He's like Roger Corman in that regard, like of that level of independent producer / director / everything, where he can just churn out these movies. And even when he isn't making a profit, I guess Roger Corman claims to only have lost money on like one movie or two movies ever. But
yeah, it was like Frankenstein Unbound or something.
Yes,
it was like, yeah, that might have been the only one.
Yeah, there's so many parallels between Charles Band and Roger Corman, though. Like, I admire Band's business models, despite how sometimes wacky they are.
Yeah.
Very much a maverick and very unafraid to try something different. Like, as a VHS distributor, I really was fascinated by how he ran Wizard Video and would acquire the rights to movies that didn't really have any kind of international presence. Like, he'd buy movies from Italy. He bought I Spit on Your Grave without
Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, he was the early distributor for that. Yeah,
and he would just make the boxes, and then he'd have a different duplicator make the tapes, and they would order boxes from him. So he was like a box manufacturer along with the rights owner of many of these films. I often fantasize, how can I do that with my label? But it's not really possible in this day and age. But
I would definitely take a tour of that box factory. Absolutely.
One minute you're on top of the world producing movies in the castle you bought. The next day you're some schmo working at a box factory.
Right.
Oh God. Well, yeah, all right. Well, that's kind of most of my background on this. There really wasn't too much, although again, I got to shout out the Empire of Screams box set here, because they really had a lot of fantastic resources for a movie that didn't seem to be particularly well documented at the time. So I always love it when we can find details like that. As for the film transfer on this DVD, looks pretty incredible for what they had to work with. So the original print, the only print available was the original 35 millimeter theatrical print, which still has its film grains and it has its pops and it has its textures and things like that. But this has been cleaned up about as well as humanly possible on this disc. And they even have a little disclaimer at the beginning saying like, there's some offset text like in the credits like that we couldn't fix. Like that's the way it was in the movie, and so we decided to just keep it for accuracy's sake. But it definitely got, you even see the contrast of like they're showing some of the footage in the special features that looks significantly worse. It looks more soap opera-y than what we actually get.
If you watch the transfer of this movie that is on the Prime Video channel, the Full Moon channel on Amazon Prime, or I'm assuming also on Tubi, it very much recreates the experience of watching like an episode of Deep Space Nine or Babylon 5 on a recorded VHS tape.
Yeah. Oh my God, you've nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like seeing this in, it was at 2K, I think, on the Arrow set was mind-boggling. I'd only watched Arena on VHS. And the fact that the colors just dance off the screen. And of course, I love lights and fog, but there are a lot of really amazing lights and fog moments in Arena and a lot of reflective fabrics. You combine
There's a
all
lot of lasers that I love. Yeah, there's lasers in this movie.
Yeah, there's like moments that look like Logan's Run at times. Like it's just
That's a good comparison.
That's a good pull,
I didn't even think of until you said that. You're absolutely right.
I am going to speculate. I don't know if you guys are watchers of Community, but I'm going to speculate there's at least one fan of Arena on the Community writing staff, because I think there's at least 2 episodes that are paying homage to this movie. The Meow Meow Beans episode and the one where they're making like the movie with the footage of Chang. Like, I feel like there's a little bit of Arena in both of those in the best possible way.
Sure.
Yeah, I could see that. I need to rewatch Community. I watched it once years ago, but you can tell movie nerds definitely wrote that show. Is it Dan Harmon? Did he?
Yeah, Dan Harmon. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I get a little bit of George Lucas from this movie too, which I don't often get from Charles Band Productions, but there's just some kind of like, there's some sci-fi worship and some big like goals that I think really shine through, especially with all the creative aliens and beasties that move throughout.
I mean, the whole movie is basically just a big cantina scene.
Damn it,
right?
Steve!
Like, was that? I'm sorry. Did I say your thing? I'm sorry. That's the problem with having a mono brain. Sometimes we just we beat each other to these.
All good. Yeah. I really love specifically the bar scenes. Yeah. And the music.
I mean, I love that idea of all these different species just intermingling and like goofing off and like just like it's not a big deal. Oh yeah, there's Gary, the alligator man. Look at him walking around in the background. He's good. He's a janitor. Like I don't know what you want. He's got 10 feet.
Yeah.
Where you see that now is in one of my current favorite shows running, which is Star Trek Lower Decks.
Yes. Yeah, I just finished binging that whole thing, and it's incredible. Speaking of Star Trek and of actually Babylon 5, we shouted out earlier. Got to shout out some of the cast members here because this movie is a little bit of a nexus point for genre actors about to break out in TV. Claudia Christian, who plays Quinn here, would be the star of Babylon 5 for several years. I mostly know her as Bill's mom on Freaks and Geeks. I kept like trying to put my finger on like, how do I know her? Because I've never watched Babylon 5, but like I definitely recognize her.
Oh, she has a prominent role in one of my very favorite movies, Jack Shoulder's The Hidden.
Oh yeah. That's right. Yes. Isn't that? Yes, you're absolutely right. I totally forgot.
Yeah.
But of course, we also get Armin Shimmerman here playing Weasel, who, would you believe it? Somebody cast Armin Shimmerman to wear a lot of heavy makeup and have pointy little teeth and just be kind of a weird little guy. It's amazing. I wonder if this is the first movie to use him in that way.
Maybe I wonder if that helped him get the role of Quark on Deep Space Nine. Like, hey, I can act in prosthetics.
Yeah, and I mean, he is kind of being a little quirky here. Like, I'm not super well versed in Star Trek, but like the few bits of Star Trek I've seen have always prominently featured Quark for whatever reason. Yeah. And that's kind of his deal. Like, he's sort of like not really the villain, not really the hero, but he's this kind of shady intermediary, which is sort of what Weasel's doing. Weasel's more villainous, of course, but
yeah, absolutely. You're totally right, though. He's an anti-hero in a way on Deep Space Nine. He's always making shady financial deals. Always a buck, but part of that's the Ferengi rules of acquisition.
And the one last guy I want to shout out is Hamilton Camp. He plays Shorty, the diner owner, and I did not realize he's also the voice. He was a prominent voice actor for cartoons. Mm-hmm. So if you recognize his voice, it might be because you watched DuckTales, where he played Gizmo Duck.
Oh,
gotta love that. He was Fenton Crackshell,
God, his voice
aka
was
Gizmodo.
familiar. That was driving me crazy. Okay.
But the star of the movie here is Paul Satterfield, who is he was a soap opera actor at this time. He also had a prominent role in Creepshow 2 in
I was going to
the
say,
famous
Steve,
segment.
you may not have recognized him without that yellow thong on.
Without being eaten by a garbage bag.
Oh, he's the garbage guy.
Yeah, he's the yellow Speedo guy from Creepshow 2 is where I know him from. And he looks a lot like a blonde Christopher Reeve. If
Okay,
you
yeah,
look
I
at
can
his
see that. I can
face,
see that.
I was looking at his face every time there was a close up, and I'm like, he looks like someone. He has the same facial structure as someone. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, it's Christopher Reeve, and that makes sense because he's very like chiseled and sort of angular.
Mhm.
He really is. Yeah. Yeah.
And his character here is a short order cook who wants to be the greatest fighter in the space arena. So we should establish that this movie takes place in the year 4038. So quite far in the future, which I always love. Like if you're going to go into the future, go ridiculously far. So far that nobody can poke any holes in it, because it's like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't they be able to do anything? Why wouldn't science just be magic? It's 2000 years from now. Who cares? Yeah, I think that's the right way to go. But they're living on this like satellite station that's just kind of floating around, and most of the economy in this station revolves around the arena, which is just these gladiatorial duels where they get two aliens to wail on each other. They shine this little like laser beam on each of them to sort of level out their powers, so like one species doesn't get an advantage over another species. But the big deal here is that a human has not successfully fought in the arena in years. And this guy, this little short order cook guy, who's not very good at cooking, by the way, he's spilling stuff. He looks like he's in an infomercial. Like he's just, whoa, this happened to you?
It's like watching movies with single parents trying to cook breakfast. They're like juggling eggs and like slipping around, like, oh, burning stuff. Yeah.
Mom, you put the spatula on my bread. I can't eat this. Yeah. Yeah, he's just bad at it, but he wants to be a fighter, and he's got the goods. He can take it to him. He didn't really land on whether he was going to be kind of like stoic Rocky type or kind of chip on his shoulder type. And so he kind of falls in the middle where he's like sort of bland and sometimes sarcastic, right? That seems like kind of where they landed on with this. What's his character's name? I already forgot.
Steve Armstrong.
Steve Armstrong. Of course, I forget his name is Steve. Of course, I forget that. Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, so he just wants to be the king of the arena, but the arena is controlled by a warlord named Rogar, who basically just fixes all the fights and makes sure that his guy is always going to win. It's more specifically his guy Horn. And this movie continues the trend that I love so very much of the late 80s, early 90s sci-fi anything, which is just give everybody the most ridiculous names. This is very much in keeping with everything in The Running Man, everything in American Gladiators after this. Just give us a nice, strong, monosyllabic, strong name.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Yeah, Rogor is such a great villain name too. And speaking of Rogor, I had a really exciting moment when I figured out that Rogor is played by Mark Alamo, who's also in Deep Space Nine.
Is he really?
He's a Cardassian. He was like the main evil Cardassian, not Kardashian.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's Kim. He was Gul Dukat.
Dukat, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta watch more Star Trek. I watched Lower Decks. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna finally do it. I'm gonna watch some more Star Trek.
What I love about this performance, again, another Star Trek tie-in, is that really all they did was put some shimmery paint on him and kind of make him look like Brent Spiner.
Yeah, a little bit.
But he's channeling. I mentioned Space Mutiny before, and he is channeling John Philip Law's performance as Calgon in that movie.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of like bug eye moments, sort of like vamping for the camera, that I appreciated the commitment to this performance. But I think that's why it doesn't stand out as much in a movie like this, is because, granted, when you look back at the cast of this movie, like Paul Satterfield is whatever. Like we said, it's sort of hard to really know how he's playing this. He's a little bit bland, but sometimes he's like a little bit likable and a little snarky or sarcastic. But I think a lot of the other performances, like in particular, like Hamilton Camp's performance and we'll get to Shari Shattuck also in this movie, they're sort of matching his intensity to a degree. And one of the things Steve and I talk about sometimes is like some campy performances in movies where the other people aren't up to task really like come across as super over the top and super distracting when it's like one person who's trying to elevate the material and everyone else is like, ah, fuck this movie.
Oh,
Because
for
that
sure.
energy comes across a lot too. And you don't get that here. Like here, everyone seems to think that they're going to make, if nothing else, a pretty entertaining, memorable movie.
Right. Every scene that he shares with Armin Shimmerman is pretty electrifying. I think that they were actually really on point and had a lot of good energy between the two of them. They're not Academy Award winning performances, but you can tell that they're putting their backs into it, so to speak. And Mark Alamo kind of reminded me of Joe Spinell in Star Crash a little bit too. So
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I really got Evil Space King vibes from him. I think the silver powder didn't do him a lot of favors.
Which
They
is,
gave him the same stuff
what's
that they put on
funny,
Buddy Epson and Wizard of Oz, and so he kept choking out. Yeah.
Shay, you brought up Joe Spinell in Star Crash, and I'm like, Paul Satterfield, like he's sort of a Marjoe Gortner. Like,
Oh my God, you're right.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. He's got big Gortner energy.
can we put that phrase on a T-shirt?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God, please.
Marjoe Gortner or Marjoe Go Home. Yeah,
And
right.
you
There
know
go.
what? I will say there's a similarity in look between Claudia Christian and Carolyn Monroe also.
Mm.
See that? The clothing, but yeah, the hair, totally. The glamorous eyeshadow.
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
seeing it. Sure. Wow. It's
Yeah.
who knew that Star Crash would be a perfect double bill with Arena, or maybe triple bill with Robot Docs.
That's a night. You got
Actually,
yourself
yeah,
a night right there.
That's a
Like,
fun night. That's a fun night for sure.
Yeah.
So as the movie goes on, we're kind of getting to see the world a little bit more. We meet Quinn, who is Claudia Christian's character, who is kind of she's like the manager. She's like a bit fighting manager. She's not like a Burgess Meredith type, but she is kind of more on the business side of things. She sees potential in this big lug who likes to punch things and gets him in the ring with some truly ridiculous character designs. The signature one, I think, being Sloth. I think Sloth is the character that people most remember from this movie because he's this big splay-legged, half Jabba the Hutt, half like Gorn from Star Trek sort of monster that doesn't really move around a lot, which presents a little bit of a problem if you're going to have like a sparring match. Like if basically it's like if you want this thing to seem more threatening than the average punching bag, it takes some slightly creative editing. And I will give credit to Paul Satterfield. He is giving an energetic physical performance. He is committing to beating the crap out of this thing. Sometimes he probably hit it too hard because I could see some of the ball and socket armatures coming out of the legs when he punched them. But again, all part of the charm of this movie.
Can you imagine being an alien with that body type and being a professional fighter, just splayed at all times, just exposing your sensitive region for it to kick their boot into? I kept thinking, wow, that's an unfortunate kind of.
Yeah, I'm hoping he keeps like his reproductive organs in his spines or something. You know, he keeps those protected, and so it's not just like a big fleshy target. But yeah.
Yeah, prone at all times. Yeah, he was really cool. I love that you said Jabba the Hutt. I got that. I got hairless mole rat. I got like frog. Really, I don't know if I've ever seen a cooler alien in a wrestling match / would you call this wrestling, or is this like full contact mixed martial arts?
It's definitely more MMA than it is boxing. So there's punching, but there's also kicking. And it seems like, you know, they're sort of they're allowed to kick in a lot of different places. I don't see too many like kicks to the face of Steve Armstrong, but I do see kicks to the legs and chest. And one thing I really like in this, one of the cool little things is that they have sort of like the something marking the out of bounds, and you get like a green shock when you get knocked out of bounds, which I thought was a neat little touch.
Yeah, so that's it is kind of like an amalgam of a lot of different things, because that little touch there would be like sumo, right? Where they draw the little line of
Exactly.
salt that you can't step out of. But then they've also got some like kind of gladiatorial armor, plus they're just like throwing haymakers like they're boxers, plus there's wrestling. Like, yeah, so it is just kind of like a future sport where they've all combined into one big punchy kicky fest.
There you go. It is the future, so they can do what they want.
Yeah. Everything's magic in the future. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just love the idea of that beam that has to come down, because that's the only way they can really explain that, like, why is this big hulking monster not just like ripping his head off? Like, why is he not just like immediately dying? But also it kind of seems like if you're genetically regulating everybody, then how does nobody well, I guess they do answer that. Like, they have an advantage because Rogor is fixing the fights. Like, he gives his guys like a slight little improvement on their skills. But I feel like you would kind of need to do that, right? If you want the competition to be interesting at all, or to like ever happen, you would need one person to be a little stronger, a little faster.
Absolutely. I got the vibe from Rogor that he's kind of like their take on Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
That he's really the mastermind behind everything, and that he's influencing the storyline, and that he does what he wants, but he has to win. He doesn't really care if maybe an underdog comes up through the ranks, as long as the underdog is under his wing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sets him off about Steve Armstrong, as he says during this match that he didn't know Steve was a fighter. He kept repeating that, and he was pretty perturbed that he didn't realize that in advance. And I think eventually, of course, they do butt heads, and Steve isn't really interested in going the way of Rogor.
Right.
Yeah, he has higher ambitions, and wants to stay with, of course, Quinn. And yeah, they I guess antics ensue.
And I guess to bring up Quinn, like we have a little bit of a Teen Wolf situation in this movie between Quinn and Jade, where Quinn is the boof, and Jade is the mean, popular blonde girl who is only interested in him because he's a sports celebrity, you know. So he's got this conflict here where he's really into Jade, the holographic nightclub singer, who those songs that she's coming up with are absolutely nuts. Like, apparently the sound of music in the future is just catwalking over keyboard. Like, I don't know what exactly they're going for. It's like some kind of crazy space jazz.
It reminded me of Vicious Lips, but bad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, good call.
He's performing on stage with great lighting. Like, I mean, but they had great music. She's not even singing on key.
No.
I mean, it really, really bad. She's beautiful, has great style.
Sure.
I don't think I like the music of the future, if that's the music of the future, unfortunately. Maybe people evolve to a point where they can enjoy that kind of dissonance. But yeah, I don't think that the music is necessarily the strong point of this movie.
a friend of mine today sent me a video of like somebody on Twitter or X or wherever had a contest to find the worst piece of video game music, and so they played the winner, which was from a Spider-Man game for the Genesis, and it kind of sounds like this music. It's just a lot of kind of farty sounds, and then like that's sort of what's going on here. But like, it cracked me up because also immediately anytime I see like a holographic performance like this, I immediately think Star Wars Christmas Special, and that just makes me laugh. So
my God, you're right. Yeah, definitely. There's a wave of movies in the 90s, especially of the early 90s and late 80s, where technology is starting to permeate our subconscious, our societal fabric. and we're starting to wonder, what does it mean? What can we do with technology? And there's like all these cyber movies that are coming out. And that's what I loved about Arena in some ways, is it's this hybrid between sci-fi in the future, but using really kind of dated modern quote unquote technology.
Yeah.
Like you'd
That's
think
that's the kind of thing I think about anytime I see that that new dome in Las Vegas, you know, like with the big projection images on that. I'm like, oh shit, we are in like Blade Runner times now. Like, I mean, technically we're 5 years past Blade Runner, but yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
We're there. We're catching up.
Yep, that's for sure.
Pretty soon we're gonna have Jaws 19 marquees jumping off to bite us. Yeah.
And this movie's got aesthetically got a little Blade Runner in it too. In some, like, I definitely see either, you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see Joanna Cassidy's like snake lady walking around, or Sean Young's character design with sort of there was a lot of people in the shots of the spectators who had some pretty angular shoulder pads.
Yeah, very true.
A lot of femme fatale 20s, 30s fashion coming in here. I wonder if that was a byproduct of the screenplay being sort of based in earlier film noir, film sports
Yeah,
movies.
oh, that's a good catch. Yeah.
Yeah, I really got femme fatale vibes from Jade. Was that her name? Yeah.
Jade, yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, there is a lot of that like kind of 1940s sort of scrappiness with like the underworld that's going on here too.
Well, there's that, and it's like these tropes of a noir and femme fatale, but then also at the same time, it looks like either people are dressed like they're ready for the opening ceremony of the Olympics, or a Frankie Goes to Hollywood video.
Yes, either way. Yeah, they're about to go meet Craig Wasson in the bathroom. Yeah, but I mean, I think all of this is like really fun and it's really enjoyable to watch. Like if you're judging this as a sports movie, I feel like I never really felt any kind of heated rivalry for Steve and Horn, you know, like the rivalry is always like Rogor. Rogor is always the big bad here, but like we want to be invested in the same way we're invested when Rocky fights Clubber Lang. You know, we want to feel a little bit of a sense of animosity there and some stakes that I didn't really feel.
You could have had Horn come out earlier and just beat Quinn to death.
Oh God.
And then he would, and then he would drive around in his Lamborghini and think about stuff that happened 10 minutes ago, and boom, it would all make sense.
That's it, like having a montage of a montage.
Yeah.
You know, a really strong male vocalist over some screaming guitar.
Hearts on fire. Yeah, wrong movie, I know, but I don't care. Yeah, no, we needed something like that, like a little bit more to just energize that final fight, because like we said, it's this movie strikes a weird kind of balance of being like halfway between serious and silly. And when that happens, the silly's always going to win, you know, because you're introducing rubber lizards that you're like punching with while dressed in like space underwear, and like it's always going to be a little silly. Like, and I don't understand the decision to try and make this more of a serious play, and I think that kind of hurts it ultimately in the long run. But there is still a lot of really fun stuff here, and it's a very entertaining, like pretty fast-paced movie. We've had a bit of a tough run recently covering a couple of movies that are much shorter than this one and feel much longer.
Sure.
Including one, if we want a little tie-in, Demonic Toys 2 director William Butler is in this movie playing Skull, and of course Peter Manoogian directed Demonic Toys 1, so there's a whole little Demonic Toys connection here. But yeah, that was one of the ones that felt kind of interminable, but this one really moves.
Yeah, it really does. I noticed its pace it starts off immediately, like we're in space in the very beginning during the credits, but the moment we enter what I call Space Thunderdome,
yes,
it's just action, edit. You meet almost every character that's important for the film in the first 5 minutes, with the exception of Jade.
Yeah.
But not being quite as important as you might think she's supposed to be. I don't want to spoil her arc, but I really liked her character's arc, and I like what they did with her. And I like that Steve Armstrong was never entirely motivated by lust, or, I mean, even like I hate to say it, but like the new Creed movies, like there's such a heavy slant on romance, and like that's what's driving him along with the to be the best champ, and to also to carry up the Creed name. Like there's so much baggage, and this character with Steve was just kind of simple. Like he just wanted to be the champ, and at one point he meets the former human champion, and
Oh, right. Yeah.
him his medal, or like what was it, like his trophy in medal form. And I remember thinking, why would he just hand that over to Steve? Like that's a pretty big thing. You'd think that he'd hand that over after Steve won the championship,
Yeah.
Well, he's so
make-
handsome.
Yeah,
yeah,
make
he's
him do
got
one. Let him keep his trophy. You could afford another trophy. Come on.
totally. But yeah, what you're saying about it riding the very fine line between silly and serious also so much reminds me of Roger Corman.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
get that,
very much.
like Roger Corman saying, I paid for a monster, you're going to see a monster. Like rather than having the monster in shadow, like putting it out full frontal in the light, and it's just
Right.
sillier. Like he doesn't care. He's like, this is what we're going to do, and
Well,
people love it.
a few weeks ago, Shay, we did an episode on a movie I'm sure you're familiar with, where that really suffered from that sort of mentality when it came to its monster designs, and that was Rawhead Rex,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
which
Oh,
is a monster that should have been kept in the shadows.
the more-
Yeah. The less you see of those googly eyes, the better. Yeah.
he looks like he's seen things that he can't unsee. Oh, poor Rawhead Rex. Oh yeah.
But I mean, and there is that Corman quality of this movie where, like, most of the time these monster designs look pretty good, and then you get things like Shorty the Short Order Cook, who has 4 arms just because it's sci-fi, and that effect is never not hilarious to me, because you either have close-up shots where it's clear that there's just like a PA behind him, like under his big robe, like working his hands like it's a Whose Line Is It Anyway game, or you have him walking around with these very fake looking Spirit Halloween hands like flopping at his sides as he's walking around.
It was
And it's
Michael.
like-
It was Michael Deek who was behind him.
Was it?
Yeah.
Was it? Those
Yep.
were his hands? Yeah,
Yep.
I believe it. I mean, that's so funny to me. And like, it's always a silly effect. And it's just like, they could have just made this guy a 2-handed guy, but no, it's sci-fi. It's the far future. We all have extra hands.
I love that too. That's where the silly really works. Like all of his jokes I thought were really funny. Like when he's like, I only have 4 hands.
Yeah.
I have a theory that that joke was written before the character was developed. And it's like,
Yeah.
I just they just really wanted to make this joke, and we're like, well, one of these aliens is going to have 4 arms because we need our big joke to land here, because it gets you. It's effective. It's pretty funny joke. I mean, I'm a simple man sometimes. What can I say?
It's definitely like a leftover of the earlier, funnier script, because obviously I feel like these writers would be smart enough to know how lazy it would seem to just introduce, like, what if guy plus 2 arms? Like that's kind of that's a lazy, like, sort of tropey sci-fi thing that I think they're smart enough to know the difference between. Like, so I think they would put that in as a joke, and I feel like that was just kind of adapted sort of literally.
It's hilarious. I think that like what you were saying about the visual gag of it is very Three Stooges to me. Like you're just waiting for that guy to pop out, and it's like he's trying to sneak into I don't know, sneaking in somewhere under the back of
These 3 toddlers in a trench coat.
Basically, yes, exactly.
so silly. And I love that they kept up with the jokes the whole film, and there are various scenes where you can tell like the poor guy standing behind him just probably had to stand there all day, like
Oh
Just-
yeah.
shot,
just sweating against his back, like working the puppet hands. It's like, I mean, and this is an Italian production too, so we get a lot of ADR, just in keeping with the Italian filmmaking tradition, and it always just feels extra silly, especially when you have like Hamilton Camp, who plays Shorty, is a British actor doing an American accent, which always sounds a little off to begin with, and then when you add it in ADR, when like the lips don't quite match, it makes it extra heightened and silly for me. And it works pretty well for most of the characters because a lot of them are just big rubber lizard masks, like the lips are not going to sync up at all. And I love little details, just like he's got a lizard sparring partner at one point who's got like this really huge mouth.
That's my
That guy's
favorite
just
part.
always kind of like muttering under his breath, like he's like a Flintstones appliance, who's just like a guy. He's constantly got a little wisecrack, and I love that.
Well, the funny thing is, I was watching it with my earbuds in, connected to Bluetooth, and the ADR of that creature, the audio was going from right to left, so it was really interesting to listen to because every once in a while it would fade out, and I would be like, oh, I guess it's done, and then it would come back on my other ear, and it would just be him muttering to himself like, oh, I don't want to fight this fucking guy anymore.
Yeah.
Great. I didn't notice that. I wish I would have listened with earbuds. I noticed the large lizard. Was that Stitches?
Stitches, yep.
Yeah.
He kind of talks like Ludo from Labyrinth, but then a little bit the demon from Despiser, which is a really insane CG horror film.
That's a deep cut, yeah.
So just a really cartoonishly demonic voice. And I really didn't notice the ADR as much unless it was on the prosthetic actors.
Yeah,
it is in there. It's a little jolted. It's a little off. Like that explains some of why it felt like the movie wasn't quite on its seam at moments.
Yeah, and I was looking that up recently, and I got an explanation, and then I immediately forgot it of why the Italian film industry has always done that. It's something to do with like translating it for TV. I forget the exact reason, but every Italian film production does that, and you just kind of have to get used to it. And you do slot into it after a little bit. Like you get used to the sound of it, and especially with this very heightened, silly world that you're playing around in, it doesn't feel too out of place.
No, you're totally right. So many of the Italian movies I grew up watching, and especially horror and spaghetti westerns, all have pretty distinct ADR. And from what I understand, it was mostly because a lot of the actors were multinational. They all spoke different languages, and then it was just easier than having to have everyone be on the same language. And it was easier when they would sell in other territories because most of their income was from other video territories. But that being said, like there's definitely kind of a lost art with ADR movies. Like I don't know a lot of 80s and 90s movies that do an incredible amount of ADR. I'm not too up to date with that. I watched a few newer Italian horror films and they don't seem to have as much ADR.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in as much. I recently watched the movie Stage Fright from 1987, which does have quite a bit of ADR, and it also has another multinational cast that's all kind of getting their own languages dubbed over. So yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting practice, and it takes a little getting used to, similar to watching any like foreign language film. Like they all have their own kind of styles and their own different little quirks like that.
No, see, I refuse to believe anything other than that was Franco Nero's real speaking voice.
Trouble. And it's also different in a way from, not to go too off track, but different from watching a translated Shaw Brothers movie or Godfather movie where there's a language barrier and they're just interpreting into whatever language is being spoken by that country that it's being sold in. But sometimes, like we were watching a movie, my friends and I, Peter and my partner Sam, we were watching The Wizard's Curse, and it was really interesting because there are multiple versions of Wizard's Curse translated into English, and every single translation is vastly different. And some of the translations absolutely hilarious, like hysterical. We were like cry laughing at some of these interpretations. But yeah, the Italians always were pretty good at just catching it up just enough to where you can kind of hardly tell it's happening.
I mean, I am a sucker for Italian B movies in particular, because there's something so very renegade about them. Like, you could just call a whole movie Terminator 2, even though it's actually ripping off Aliens, even though it actually has nothing to do with either of those movies. Like, yeah, go nuts. Why not? Yeah.
Just call it Robo War and make it part Predator, part RoboCop.
Exactly.
Die Hard.
Yeah. 1990, The Bronx Warriors.
Oh, yeah, yes. Oh, that was so good.
a favorite of mine for sure. I think one of my favorite, not favorite is a strong word, but one of the most sort of egregious ones is if you've ever seen Bruno Mattei's Cruel Jaws.
Yes. Oh my God. I love Cruel Jaws.
I have not, but I
Oh,
love Matai. I just have been watching quite a few of his action movies. Born to Die was one of I'm spacing on the other one, but there's a bunch on the Arrow streaming service right now.
Awesome.
Cruel Jaws is amazing because it's not only a Jaws ripoff, they actually use some footage from the movie. They don't just steal the plot, they steal the actual movie, and whole chunks of the script like are just all in the movie.
And they use a slightly doctored by one note, I'm gonna say, John Williams' Star Wars main theme.
Oh yeah, that's right. They use the Star Wars theme. It's almost exactly the same. Yeah.
People rip off music from a different movie entirely. Like, I don't know if it was Bruno Mattei. I think it was Bruno Mattei for Hell of the Living Dead. Just used the score to Dawn of the Dead.
Why not?
No question.
Go nuts. I'm not sure if I have anything else on Arena other than just I had a blast with this movie. It was a nice, refreshing change of pace. We had a rough little go for a couple of weeks there of movies we were struggling to find anything to say positive about, and I have no problem saying positive things about Arena. I think it would have worked better if they would just had committed to being a full comedy and just kind of leaned into it and really had fun with those boxing movie tropes. But I still think what's here is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I loved this movie's simplicity of story, but there's a lot of genre mashed into it.
Yeah.
It's sci-fi, it's film noir, it's a sports movie, it's an underdog sports movie. There's amazing character design. Sometimes it's a little bit of an action movie. And then there's this underground society we didn't touch too much on in the tubes, these underworld that you have to
Oh,
find.
right.
And it felt a little bit like a layered society rebelling against its corrupt big brother overlooking everybody. And it's this microcosm of space. And it really felt like Deep Space Nine, the movie. And being a big Deep Space Nine fan, I just absolutely adore it. And I kind of wonder how this group of actors specifically made their way into sci-fi TV, if it was a bit of a pipeline. I wonder if someone looking for talent saw this movie and specifically recruited these folks. But yeah,
I'm willing to bet. Yeah,
I was gonna say it would be weird if that's not how it happened. Like,
yeah, it'd be really, really uncanny. Yeah, it's a well-paced movie. Sometimes I would zone out and then I'd be right back in it the moment something visually striking would happen, like especially the scenes in the bars. And really the underworld is really cool, and everything about this microcosm is it's like diverse environmentally. Like, you know, when you're in the arena, you're in the arena. When you're in the bars, you're in the bars. Or in the underworld, you're in the underworld. But you can kind of feel like you're still in the same universe, in the same building. And yeah, I mean, part of that is because they were confined to a very small space, but they did a lot with what they had. And
they did. I'm going to piggyback off of that and say that we've had a couple of weeks with movies that barely qualify as such.
Yeah.
And this feels like a movie ass movie. Like it is a world. They build a world. And what I like about this movie, I like Robot Jox, I like Oblivion, and I feel like this movie is if those two movies mated. And for that reason, I really like this movie a lot. I think there's such fun designs, and the world building is fun, but it also has that sports element, competition element that Robot Jox has. I think this movie is just a lot of fun, and it's brisk, and it moves, and the pacing and the editing is pretty great, which was one of the things we said about Robot Jox too, is one of our biggest praises we were singing for that movie. But yeah, this there were movies we watched over the last few weeks that nothing happens, and it feels like they don't create anything. And here there's a whole world that they do on a small budget, and it's like you have an intriguing story, you have a cast who's up for the task of recognizing what movie they're in. And I know you've got a little more money into it, because even if this was only $1 million, $1.5 million, that's significantly more than the last couple of movies we watched. But it's like we said, it's all there on screen. And I like Robot Jocks, I like Oblivion, and to me this movie looks like a marriage of those two things. And so I remember from when I was a kid, I think I remember the idea of this movie more than the actual movie. I think I remember this sort of space gladiators type thing. And watching it now, I was like, oh, this is so entertaining. I will definitely revisit this sometime in the near future. And I think a Robot Jocks, we're turning it into a quadruple feature now. It's a robot, it's a Robot Jocks, Oblivion, Star Crash, Arena, quadruple feature. Some local theater, make that happen.
Yeah. We should just throw something random in there. Just like also Dying Young. All right, we're going to watch all those. Yeah. Yeah. Throw that one in.
A wild card. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is such a good way to put that. Yeah. It's a really good amalgam of what Peter Manoogian was capable of doing, and also the kinds of movies that Full Moon wanted to release. It's in this really special zone where it never quite made it out mainstream. And I don't know if it's particularly gory or freaky enough for your average horror fan. Like a lot of horror fans I know don't really talk about Arena.
No.
I'd argue that it's fantastic in and of itself. Just the fact that Screaming Mad George does some of the effects along with John Carl Buechler. Like, this is royalty in low budget horror. It's definitely worth watching. It's definitely worth watching aloud on a big screen. It would be good on the big screen at a theater.
I think that'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, I would definitely want to check that out.
I think it's also worth saying, like, I didn't discover this movie as a kid, but I think if I would have loved it.
Yeah, definitely. This is prime, like, B movie entryway. You know, this is your first joint as a kid. Yeah, this is that. This is a leading into your hard drug horror fixation. Well, Shea, thank you so much for being here. It's been delightful having you on and talking about this very goofy movie with you. Where can people find all of your stuff?
Oh, yes. Thank you again for inviting me on, by the way. This has been a blast. People can find me on Instagram. It's Black_VVideo, Black VVideo. And I also have a Squarespace store. You can hit me up there. You can hit me up on Facebook. You can catch me with the Arrow Video podcast, 2 episodes out of 6. And I'm also on the Movie Melt podcast pretty frequently. I've been podcasting with them for about 6 years. I took a little break, but we're back at it. And I also have a Patreon podcast with Sam from the Arrow podcast called VHS Quest, where we cover 4 VHS tapes a week for $4 a month. So 16 obscure VHS titles broken down, discussed. They're all tapes from my collection or that I have rented from the local video store, Movie Madness. And
perfect.
A lot of fun.
How obscure are you getting on that? You talking some Polonia joints?
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Polonia, to stuff I find at the side of the road. We talk about Todd Sheets movies. We talk about Martin Scorsese movies. Like, we're kind of all over the place. Like, whatever is jumping out at us.
All of those copies of What Women Want from the thrift store.
God. I found a really good one called Demo Derby Demons that had Freddy Krueger themed demolition derby car. And total delight. If it weren't for the podcast, I never would have pulled that tape out of a bin. So
I love that.
Out there.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Everybody should definitely check out your stuff. And we hope to have you back on another time. It's been a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah. Everybody, check all that stuff out. And if you like what we do also, jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you are listening, drop a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. If you would like to follow the show on Instagram, you can find it at Puppetmasters_Castle Freaks. You can follow me on Instagram at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We also can be found on Threads and Blue Sky and X and basically all other platforms. And we will be in the process soon of hopefully beefing up our YouTube channel a little bit so that we can add some more content onto there. Maybe even foraying into some TikTok shorts. I don't know. I don't want to predict that just yet, but it seems like we do want to get more content out there for everyone. And for Steve, this is not his only podcast. You can find him on another show. Steve, tell us about that show.
Absolutely. My other show is called Cinema Arcade. That's all one word. It's cinema and arcade mashed together because that's what we do. We watch a movie and then we play the video game that is based on that movie. We are currently in the midst of covering all of the Alien movies, which I never, ever get tired of talking about. And then, of course, December is going to be all Christmas themed. So I apologize in advance to my co-hosts. I'm going to make them watch The Polar Express, amongst other movies. So my apologies to them. Far more horrific than anything we've covered on either of these shows. But Jared was on our show talking about Puppet Master the game very appropriately. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, so we got a bunch of episodes available wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to tune in next week because we're going to be talking about another movie. This might be subject to change. I think we've got some like scheduling things that kind of got knocked around. But I believe if I'm following my spreadsheet correctly, the next movie we're going to be talking about is 1992's Netherworld from Full Moon Features. I have never seen this movie. I don't really know what it's about. I assume there's some kind of netherworld.
You would be safe in that assumption.
That'd be my guess. Yeah.
This is one that I caught on cable a long time ago. Have not revisited it in quite a long time. I went back and looking into the movies a little bit, sort of reminded myself, okay, yeah, this is that one. I've seen this before. I looked at some photos of it. Really excited to pop on and give that one a watch to revisit because that sort of falls right in that sweet spot of Full Moon. Your 1992 Full Moon Chef's Kiss. Like that.
Yeah, this is the heyday
right there. That's the heyday. So join us next week, everybody, when we will be talking about Netherworld, and we will see you soon.
Bye.